an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire, Shadow Book 3 of Killers and Kings, chapters 6, 7, and 8. In these chapters, we find out that there's a long-standing connection between the Consultants Guild and working for the Elders, and now everything is so clear and uncomfortable, and I'm extremely concerned. And fucking Yala, man. You know? Fucking Yala. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Asher for commissioning this episode. So, okay. Oh, you guys, you don't even know the faces I was making when I was listening to these chapters. I listened twice, and both times I just kept being like, I should have seen this coming. So, where to start here? The first thing I want to mention is that I am on the second book of Will White's other series, Traveler's Gate. And I am realizing that a through line for most of his series is people of great power who actually turn out to be screwing everybody over. Excuse me. I got so choked up, the frog in my throat woke up. But essentially, that tends to be a theme, is just, yeah, they have power and they seem to be trying to help, but are they really? Or, yeah, they have power and they seem to be like an unbiased group, but are they really? And this is really interesting to me because I had just said last episode how I keep forgetting that the Consultants Guild is not like a military force, that they are their own thing. And yeah, they worked for the Emperor and he was like, you know, giving them a great deal of funding and whatnot, and they worked very closely with him, but they still weren't his. And the only thing that made it seem as if they were his was how much power he held. There was no way to contest him. So every time I realized that, I kind of had a moment of like, right, God, I'm just imagining them sort of being either at loose ends without him, or they are a power that has outgrown his control and now they want to go do their own thing. But no, they've always done their own thing. It's just that they managed to work with him for quite a while. And what is it? Sorry. George says, oh my God, you're reading Traveler's Gate now. And then he says, Natasha, no, I'll commission now. I'm so sorry. I'm on the second book. You can commission me to go back. I really didn't expect anybody to want coverage of it. So I went ahead because it was free on Audible until September 1st. So there was like a deadline to listen to the first book. Sorry, everybody. I'm not sorry, though, because it's been really fun to have a different Will White book. I will say this. I am enjoying the Traveler's Gate series, but it feels like the bones of this series. It's really like less polished and the characters are less interesting. And there are aspects of it that are really fun and really, like, really weird in a way that's different from Cradle, because so much else of the world can feel kind of like typical high fantasy. So when you throw the weirdness in, it feels extra weird. Whereas in Cradle, so much is weird that you have to be really over the top for me to notice the weirdness. But I really feel like if you read it, there are just a lot of moments where I'm like, oh, okay, I see this moment in this book that I bet was part of what sparked the idea for another thing that happens in Cradle or even in Elder Empire. So I enjoy it, and I don't think that it's like a bad series, but it's the kind of thing that when you've read Cradle, you just see how he's grown, and going back to original works, it's kind of reassuring in a way, because I am very slowly beginning work on my own little baby book, and I have this thing that I have mentioned with the show before, and I'm sorry, I know that this is not a Traveler's Gate thing, and I will wrap this up in just a minute, but I have this happen with the podcast where I'm like putting out work now that I feel strongly about how I'm presenting my opinions, but then I think back about how strongly I was presenting my opinions 10 years ago, and that is still on the record, and I feel very uncomfortable with it being out there. And I get caught up in that with writing, where I want something to be perfect immediately, because it's going to, if I put it out there, it's out there forever. But seeing how he wrote an entire series, he wrote 2. I guess he was in the middle of still writing Elder Empire when he was writing Cradle as well, though, right? And he started another series. This guy's a maniac, but it's just nice to see that growth, while also like being able to appreciate the work that he put into the original. And I say the original because it's the first one that I think out of all of them that he wrote. George says, I always say Travelers is amazing magic system, Empire is amazing setting, and Cradle is amazing characters, but also amazing everything. I started in writing order for Will, so it's been awesome to see it develop as he writes. Yeah, and I would say, like, I prefer, as much as I like some of the Travelers magic system, the cultivation thing with Cradle really speaks to me because of the repetition of it. Traveler's Gate there's a lot of emphasis on earning something, and once you earn it, you just have it. And I really like that you can gain something in Cradle, but there are extra levels to everything, so you can just improve it and improve it. So anyway, back to this. So the whole concept here of the consultants being they existed long before the Empire and were doing deals with the elders. And so low-key are against a lot of what the Emperor represents as a group. And now a lot of their attitude about things makes way more sense. There has been, and Lucan thinks about this later, this sort of assertion that like, oh, well, chaos is better for our business. As long as everything is a mess, everybody needs help, everybody wants to pay us for our expertise, and that's just great for money making. And sure, but it wasn't enough. And now I am beginning to see, like, maybe this is actually not about the money. Maybe there is another being at work here. Not necessarily, like, in control, but Kellerac obviously has a long-standing relationship with them. And I found it interesting, too. In her POV, she describes him as Kellerac's emissary. I've been over here thinking that we're just dealing with, like, Kellerac. I can't tell if she thinks it's Kellerac's emissary, but it's actually Kellerac, or if we've thought it was actually Kellerac and it is just an emissary. I'm not really sure. But I shouldn't be surprised. You know what I'm saying? But I still am. It's like sort of finding out about like the origins of the police and finding out, oh, well, they started out as like slave catchers. The whole thing with police was to bring the hammer down on minority groups and keep them in their place on behalf of the moneyed class. And now, once you see the way they behave today, there's like this idea of what they are supposed to do, and we're all kind of shocked at the way they're behaving, and then you realize, no, this is actually right in line with the tradition of who they are. And I should have fucking seen it coming. Okay, so Mistress of the Mists. This is something that I find really, really interesting about the way that Will writes. She is constantly talking about balance. And what Will does is he takes certain words and he has a character focus on that word, and he will show it to us in a way that feels like, but that's not what that's supposed to mean. And then you realize, like, well, what is it supposed to mean? Because we have an automatic association, either societally or simply because of the way the word is often, like, used. And the concept of greed is something that obviously Lyndon is all about. And yet it's a force for good, and we don't hear greed ever used in a positive way. But for Lyndon, it's a motivating factor in him helping people, which is very interesting. Now we've got the Mistress of the Mists, and she's got Bastian's veil that is trying to tell her to balance everything all the time. And what she is doing is like, oh, yeah, balance. And by that, I mean, I won't take sides on anything, and I will always be in the middle so that I can just move wherever I need to move, because I'm a fence sitter. And so I don't have to take a side. I don't have to choose a moral code. I just need to be flexible and stay in balance. And I'm like, that's not what that means, though. And then I have to be like, why doesn't it? Words mean many things a lot of the time. The more meaning a word tends to have, the more opportunity there is to, like, sort of expand on the idea of it. You know what I mean? And balance is a big, vague word. So I've been looking at Cyphrin as malicious chaos and Bastian as soothing balance. And while I don't think that's necessarily inherently wrong, it's certainly not innately what it is. Evidently, your personality can influence the way you decide to interpret what Bastian's veil is supposed to mean. So anyway, this is a lot. And she is meeting with an emissary from Othagor. And this dude is not... How to describe this man? First of all, he ugly. It's really giving me, like, the creatures from Dresden Files that have been, like, screwed with by the Fomor. And she doesn't really have a reaction because she's seen a lot of gross shit happen to people who work with the elders. So she's just like, yeah, seems right. But also, he's extremely prideful. And when she tries to say, yeah, we might work with you, what do you have to offer us? The mere fact that she's trying to broker a deal and not just bowing and acquiescing immediately is a massive insult to this guy. Which is very interesting because I'm like, do you just not know who the consultants are? Like, have you been sent here with no... Either... He hasn't been given any briefing on who the consultants are. The Amharani, I suppose, is really what I should be saying right now. Either he hasn't been given a briefing, or he thinks that that's their reputation, but if it's an elder, they'll be different, which that's really not a full briefing then. Or he thinks that he can simply intimidate them into breaking the way that they have worked this entire time. And I can't tell with whether his attitude is Othagor's attitude or if this is just him in particular being a pain in the ass. Because Othagor is trying to fight the, what is the name of the worm one? These fucking elders, I swear to God. But the whole thing here is that Othagor needs help right away. And as she rightly points out, they can just bide their time. The Amharane have all the time in the world. They don't need to immediately bend just because an elder is in a hurry. So there's basically a bit of a dick measuring contest here. And eventually he does the whole, one does not negotiate with the raging fire, nor with the father of life. It is an honor for you to serve him, and he will honor you as he honors all of his servants once the world is his. And I cannot get over the audacity of being like, I'll pay you back later. I'll pay you when I win. Word? Like, you're not calling your banners. There's no obligation here, but he really seems to think there is. And eventually, she has to put a knife to his throat, and he does not respond well. There are a variety of responses that she has seen between people who immediately capitulate, people who are afraid, people who are impressed. And that's when we hear about Kellerac. Very instructional. I think I'll hire you after all. Since that time, Kellerac had been her best client. This guy is the kind who is, as it says, so wrapped up in pride, they couldn't take a simple threat. And I really like that. Just I'm just threatening you. God. So he leaves, and finally she says, we cannot do business with men like that. I say he leaves. He's escorted away. And then it says, to her left, in the wet grass, a mass of worms swarmed together until they'd formed into the shape of a human roughly 2 feet high. It is not only men who have such a nature. Othagor himself is prideful and vain. He trades vision of that which is distant for that which is close. The mistress was never sure whether she was dealing with a representative of Cathanachar or with the Worm Lord himself, but she remained respectful either way. Oh, sorry, I just saw, Sammy says, Cradle kind of spoils you. It's so snap, snap, snap. Reading some of the more orthodox authors feels like, man, I get it. Get to the point already. Sammy, this is exactly my feeling with fucking Brandon Sanderson. I totally understand the appeal, but oh my God, can we get the fucking man an editor, please? Because it just doesn't need to be like this. Asher says, Cathanachar, please forgive. I mostly listen to the audiobooks. Honestly, Asher, that's almost the exact correct spelling. So good on you. That was, I think you're one letter off, literally. You may consider us your asset for the coming conflict. Our agents have boarded Othagor's vessel even now, and they will be yours to command on the battlefield. And this says, the pile of worms whispered a laugh. And he's basically like, you guys can't run the world, but some of you may survive to, like, serve me, I guess. And when she says, can I expect payment at dawn tomorrow? They disappear. And she's like, all right, well, either that means yes, or I will just put my people with Othagor, you know, like if he doesn't pay up. So I guess we'll see. And it is wild to me that these elders are out here trying to act like they are such supreme beings, but they have to come to human beings and fight over armies of people. You need us. Stop it. He says even the most vile and insignificant of creatures have their uses. Sir, it sounds to me like y'all are relying on human beings to win your battle for you. So maybe just shut the fuck up. I'm just saying. Anyway. This is when we go into Lucan's POV. And he was reading this memory. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, word. Now, I guess I know what he was locked up for. I I ever questioned what he was locked up for after book 1. It starts off and he's like locked up, and I know he is, and I figure I will find out. Book 2, so much happens, and he fucking died, and I forgot. Because he's dead now, and I'm just kind of like, what does it matter? And I have to question whether or not Yala put him in the position to be killed on purpose. Because, reminder, when we are in Jyrene's POV, she is certain this dude was put here by Kellerac for her to take out, because he's an ally of Shera. And at the time, I was kind of like, I mean, maybe. And now looking at it, I'm going, oh God, maybe. And it's possibly not just because of his allyship with Shera, although she went after Maya first, and I'm assuming Maya doesn't know the info that Lucan knows. But I don't believe that Yala knew Maya was with them, and so I don't think that was necessarily something Yala was in control of or orchestrated. Lucan, on the other hand, she sent in by himself purposefully, I think. So it's kind of weird, though, because even though he was locked up, he's allowed visitors, and he's allowed books, and he's allowed access to things. So I don't know if he has, why hasn't he told Shera any of the stuff that he found out here? He even thinks here that he should, as backup, tell at least one other person this information. And it says after he confronted Yala, and I'm like, nah, before, sir. Really, you should before. And this makes me real nervous, I guess, about I don't know why he wouldn't tell Shera unless there was like a restriction placed on him against his will somehow. And I know Shera doesn't know this shit because the Mistress of the Mists thing seems to not, like, she doesn't seem to know anything about the dealings with the elders that the Amharani originally were involved with. I think she would have some feelings about that, and we have not heard from her. So that's what I'm going to go ahead. Asher says, I was never this paranoid about elder influence when I first read this. Look, these elders are super scary to me. They just seem to be able to do so much. And I can't, the sheer length of time that they have been alive and the pieces that they could have put in place and gears in motion, I am extraordinarily paranoid about it. Like, we know how embedded our own governmental structures are, and they've only been around a few hundred years. And now we've got, like, the actual same beings alive from 1,000 years ago with the regents and some of the elders from several thousand years ago waking up. I don't like it. So let's see. Based on Lucan's knowledge of his guild, it was a strange thing to wonder why they had never appointed another guild head. The vessel was a glass box, so there had been no way to appoint a successor. The box could only be used for containment, and therefore it was not a tool that anyone could bind themselves to and inherit. And I found that really interesting, that the way that it's like boxed, I would think you would be able to bind yourself to it, but it's just holding the object that is, you know what I'm saying? So like, it took me a minute to really understand what this meant, but once we think about how Shera pierces the box later and it's all contained in this one place and she like pulls it into her blade, he's over here thinking, I don't see how anybody could ever pull this power and bind themselves to it again. And once we see the way she did it, it's actually surprisingly simple and straightforward. it just took a kind of will to do it, I guess, that they hadn't maybe considered. The only person who thinks it's possible for them to do this again is Esther 6. So she must be quite pleased. I didn't really hear a lot about her opinion personally of Shara. She just sort of did seem to be like gratified that there's another Mistress of the Mists. But yeah, he is, let's see, the journal fragments he's found. There is this one where it's Esther 6 talking about how if I have to sleep under the mist, I want somebody watching my back. And that was when I was like, oh, dang. Is it that they are asleep on the island? And it turns out, yes, it is. So, everyone in the world knew about the Regents, the companions of the Emperor who slept until they were needed to defend humanity. They had shown up 5 or 6 times since the Elder War that he could confirm, always to stop a rising Great Elder or put down a calamitous rebellion. They were called Regents because they were considered representatives of the Emperor himself. When they spoke, it was as though he spoke through them. Nonetheless, they rarely governed, usually solving a problem and returning to sleep somewhere. And yeah, we wind up finding out where that is pretty shortly. I also find it interesting that, like, when he's talking about this here, about Esther 6 and the fact that she had mentioned it as a possibility, when I was reading it the first time, I thought, oh, okay, talking to her, because like we've seen, Esther 6 is awake and dealing with shit in the present. But it took me a minute to realize that it was like in her journals. So at this point, they are still asleep. And I'm very curious to see like the moment they awake, because I don't remember that. And I don't feel like we would, because we're not supposed to know where they slept yet. So curious about exactly how that works and what triggers that. I believe that at this point, the Emperor has already been killed. But yeah, he has, because when he's talking to what's his face later, he is saying, do you know where we were like assigned? So I was going to say that the death of the Emperor would be the thing that triggered them to wake up, but evidently not. So what is it? Anyway, okay, then we go to 7. And this is the fight. Now, I am not going to get into a blow-by-blow of this fight for obvious reasons. You guys understand. But I will just say how much I hated watching this, because I know they are being fucking played. It just feels to me that's what's happening. And I hate to see everybody throwing their all into attempting to destroy one another when they are being played. At least that is my interpretation of what is happening here. And I also hate the fact that Teach and Esther are fighting, because we just saw this like fangirl moment, and the only thing I could think to compare her to was Beyonce. And if I met Beyonce and then somebody was like, she's about to try and kill you, you're going to have to defend yourself against Beyonce, the heartbreak would be so real. Like, I can't fight Beyonce? What? And she has to do this. She has to fight a hero of fucking legend, basically. Personally. Which, ouch, I hate that for her. So Shara is watching all of this and kind of trying to decide what to do. Esther shouts for her soulbound vessels, and Shara takes a step back and is watching where Teach is, figuring out whether she can run for the vessels, and then she's like, nope, we got to do the thing that we originally planned on. So she grabs Barrius, and I love this moment. He had unbuttoned his sleeves and rolled them up and was tucking his glasses away into his shirt pocket. I haven't been in a scrap since I was a boy, if you don't count exercise. And she just grabs him and throws him over her shoulder and jumps out the window. I felt like I kind of wanted to see what he would do, because he doesn't seem like somebody who really knows combat at all. And I just, pure curiosity, like, we do get to see him fight a little bit later, and he's obviously not as up for it as Shara is, despite the elixir that he drank. But that's with, like, regulars, you know? I would have enjoyed seeing him up against these fucking maniacs up in this tower. So she jumps out of the window. There is a net that's waiting for them. But then when Shara looks down at Maya, she sees Maya's eyes widening. And all of a sudden, something tightens around her waist. And it turns out they basically, like, lassoed her out of midair. And they pull out, they're pulled to this other area where a bunch of magisters are, awaiting their moment to exact retribution for the murderer of their guild head. And I swear to God, oh my God. Sammy says Esther 6 going all the single ladies is headcanon now. And George says, in this series, Beyonce plays during this fight. Honestly, that would be, oh my God. I have to think of a perfect, like, fighting song, because she has a couple that would probably work really well. God, I love this whole idea, guys. Now that's going to be in my head the whole time I'm reading. I'm going to have to come up with a Beyonce song for every scene. So yeah, they have a shepherd who is all crumpled up. And Shara thinks they either found him and extracted Shara's exit plan from him, or they had read what was going on during the meeting and anticipated her actions. Either way, they're ready for her. And I was just kind of felt really sad for the shepherd. I'm assuming he's dead. And the idea that, like, I always forget about reading people and their intent and whatnot. But the idea that maybe he just resisted questioning and they were able to sort of find out anyway is just really unfair. So we have the Formaxius, and she comes at Shara, and they are not ready for the two of them with their fucking champion potion. It took me a second to realize, because obviously she took the potion in the last section, and then I'm reading this, and it says she caught the spear with ease. She turned, slamming the butt of the spear into him. It caught him in the chest, the blow launching him out and over the wall until he made a crater in a wall all the way across the street. And for a minute, I was like, what? And then it immediately has, I like this champion potion, I should get some more. And I was like, oh, right. Because I swear to God, I completely forgot. And I was just like, how is she doing this? So they make fairly quick work out of these dudes. And then there's a moment where she thanks him for the potion. Now, I know this isn't the time, but are you feeling any discomfort or nausea? This is a cutting edge batch, so I'm looking for trial feedback. I cannot with this guy. He's so annoying, but God, he's funny. I really do enjoy him. Like, have you guys been watching She-Hulk? She has in that show, an old associate that is this infuriating dude. I can't remember his name. It might be like Greg or something. And he is full on deluded about himself. And this guy feels kind of like he has that sort of energy, except he actually is succeeding. But the thing about it is that he seems to be really succeeding much more because of the money than because he's, like, particularly good. Because there's a moment later where he's talking to her and he's like, I'm not sure that you knew this because I was very discreet, but I actually had some contingencies in place just for this eventuality. And she's just like, yeah, we knew. He really fucking thinks I may have pulled one over on you guys. No, sir. You sure didn't. Bless his heart. So She drops down and lands like right near Maya and tells her we have to retrieve Esther's vessels. And when Maya takes off, Shara is like, word, I can keep up with her, which is not usually how this works. The only one to react was a single champion. He had been half sealed in a gummy pink adhesive sprayed from a pack by an alchemist so that only the champion's head and one arm were free. He tracked Shara and Maya with his eyes, swinging a sword the size of Shara's torso. If he'd been able to put more of his body into the motion, he might have gotten her, but the adhesive restricted his motion. She ducked, slipping under the awkward blow, and Maya slashed her claws at the man's eyes in passing. There is something about the idea of a guy that's like just stuck to a wall, but like only partially, and him being really strong and still being stuck. That's so embarrassing. So, let's see. A massive crash sounded from inside the first floor of the tower, followed by a roar that sounded like it was from a massive chimera, maybe the Stone Fang. If he gets his vessel, he'll return straight to the fight, Shara said. The miners had assured her that Baldassar Kern's soulbound power was the ability to enter a berserk state in which he was almost unstoppable. He would seek fight after fight until he ran out of enemies. I really thought that sentence was going to end with until he ran out of power or something. No. Nope, that's not the thing. It's until willing victims are gone. And then unwilling victims are gone. So they quickly gained confirmation that Kern had returned to the battle in the form of Esther 6 crashing through the northern wall of the top floor. And they're just going hammer and tongs. I don't know why that's the thing, but it's hammer and tongs, and I've been saying it a lot in various things I've been recording, I've noticed, and it's sort of weird how I go through cycles with my language, but there it is. And they managed to finds this sort of area that isn't populated by anybody, that she thinks that must be an oversight because they just didn't believe they were going to need anybody posted up here. And she's watching the two of them because they're obviously like talking for a moment. And Shara is thinking about going inside and sneaking to get the, box for Esther's vessels. And then she's like, no, I'm thinking like a gardener. I need to think like a guild head. There was another way. She scaled the Rose Tower. Bullets, arrows, or debris thudded into the tower next to her, but she climbed so quickly that most did not touch her. A few stung her, leaving only shallow wounds. And I love Maya follows up after her, and when they get to the top, she's just got this like pink spot where a bullet hole is healing, but she doesn't even say anything about it because the two of them are fucking just out of control. And when they get to the top, they see Isaiah and Kalazan Farstrider. They peered at the stairs, whispering to one another, clearly debating whether to cross. The floor between them and the stairs was suspect, and the stairs themselves were mostly blocked by chunks of masonry. As Shara had suspected, the guildheads had stayed to witness the fight, only attempting to make an exit after the battling champions had left. And honestly, guys, just get the fuck out of there. What are you doing? If they had been slain by Tyrfang's dark intent, the other witnesses would report the Imperialists had killed the heads of a neutral guild. That could be enough to end the conflict on its own, but they had survived, and Shara could use that. So she jumps across and scoops them up in her arms. I love this so much. So they run down the stairs with these twins under her arms. Tell them to release our vessels. And for a minute they resist, and she's like, Esther will lose if she doesn't have her full power. And finally, they're like, all right, well, I guess if it's like us versus elders, sure, okay. And they get everybody's vessels out, including Shera's. And there's a short sort of rendezvous with some shepherds and talking about like trying to evacuate the entire area. And this is when Shera is like, oh God, I'm starting to really weaken here. It's going away. Earlier, Barrius had told her it was maybe 5 more minutes, and it seems like it's not even going to be quite that long. And they have to fight. It says they fought for ... It was hard to say how long. Ordinarily, Shera could estimate the passage of time fairly well, but her enhanced senses made her feel like each second was stretched. But they fought for several long, drawn-out moments, her potion gradually losing effectiveness until the battle cooled around them. And this is always something that I find really interesting to me, because this, like the idea of battle being something, it's always talked about in Dresden Files as well, how really fights cannot last that long a time. Like, if you're in a fight that's being refereed, that's a sport, it's a very different thing, obviously. But the amount of energy that goes into a real, like, full body fight, and how tired you are afterwards, and how it's only really sustainable for a few minutes, that always has stuck with me as somebody who has never been in, like, a fight, you know? And you see so many movies where people are going out onto the battlefield sword fighting for like an hour, and it doesn't really sound like that's how it goes, really. But anyway, this moment stretching out for her as she starts to get weaker and weaker, I felt for her. I was like, this sounds like it sucks. So there is so much going on, because Teach drops her sword. It corrupts the street where she drops it. Balthazar and Kern fell like a meteor, driving a furrow in the stone until he came to a halt. Which truly, what? Like, what? He's the Hulk. That's what he is. And Esther 6 is in the air, and she yells for everybody to lay down their weapons. And Shera is like, sweet, we fucking won. And then she calls for Calder Martin to come out. And here comes a moment. He comes out. He's wearing his crown. Shera hears somebody yell no, and sees Joran pulling out his cello case. And he is trying to get his sword out. It says an expression of naked horror on his face. Her focus sharpened, and she whipped back toward Calder Martin, tapping into Bastion's power. Esther, the Emperor said, stop. And I thought it was interesting. It says the Emperor said, because of what's happening right now. She doesn't call him that. You know, like, sure, he is not the Emperor. He is Calder Martin. But here it is the Emperor said. The power she'd drawn from Bastion leaked away. Teach sat up with a gasp, and Kern stumbled forward a step as the force that held them to the ground suddenly vanished. Esther looked shocked, staring at Calder until she started scanning the street as though looking for someone. It wasn't the Emperor who had spoken, it was just Calder. His voice sounded nothing like the Emperor's, but for a second, it had felt like him, even to Shera. How much worse would it be for a reader? It had distracted her for only a moment, but that was enough for the head of the Champions Guild. And he smashes her with his mace, and it really looks like maybe he killed her. It's truly, there's a moment later where Shera thinks, oh, she's dead. And I had to believe it. And it's just like quickly we find out, not quite, but it's a very close thing. So this, and later she grabs Esther's body and they bring her back to the tunnel down to where a bunch of alchemists are. And one of them is injecting her with this like serum that's supposed to help revive her. And he says that it's enough. It's more than he would give like a rampaging elephant or something. I think he says like 10 times as much. But because she's a regent, probably she can handle it. And then he plunged the needle into what might have been Esther's thigh. And the fact that this bitch is so fucked up that Shara can't tell if it's her thigh or another body part, that is extremely disturbing to me. I was trying to even imagine how fucked up you'd have to be to not even be able to tell, and I can't. And like even picking up Esther from the ground, there are pieces of her left behind on the ground. Just everything about this is so horrible. I hate it. And throughout all of this reminder, Shara is weakening and getting dizzy because it's not just that her strength is waning from the potion. There are going to be side effects afterwards as well. And Maya, for her part, is kind of like, I don't know if this bitch is going to make it. And they just have to do their best. I love when they are heading towards the tunnel. They come across a group of like people from the Black Watch with their arrows knocked. And Joran looks at all of them and is just like, yeah, which one of you wants to fucking start some shit today? And nobody fires. So the identical faces of the Farstrider sisters peeked over the side of the wagon. You will tell everyone what happened here today, won't you? Shara asked them. And basically she's relying on news getting out that Calder has been corrupted by an elder so that he loses power. And the two sisters say that they will tell what has happened today. So then we go to chapter 8. And 3 years ago, and Lucan is talking about how I can't find the information I need to find. There's so much history and not a lot of it is relevant. And there's some talk about how like there's an uneasy sort of peace. Things are okay. It's not the chaos that it was immediately after the Emperor's death, but it's like, you know, it's teetering on the edge of everything. He had discovered thousands of minor guild secrets, but still nothing explaining the actions of the architects. And this is when he starts to be like, I don't get it. Are they like, chaos is good for business, just doesn't feel like enough. They must have known of some time limit, some plan the Emperor had meant to implement before his death. They wouldn't have rushed Shara unless they thought they had a clear deadline, and he was convinced it had to do with the connection between the Mistress of the Mists and the Regents. But he was tired. Tired of asking the same question with no answers, and tired in the usual sense. Now the whole question of why did they want to kill the Emperor sooner than planned? I keep sort of thinking of Shara's perspective and the feeling of we can't just be waiting around for this guy to eventually lose his mind. I have to do something. And that felt like a very good explanation in that moment. But she was being urged to speed it up even beyond that. And that's the part that I really don't know what to say about it. And I can't imagine that, like, was he on the verge of actually defeating the elders? It doesn't feel like that. And he never really seemed to express any feelings that he was on the verge of something like that. So what was he about to do? Was it the use of this chair? What is it called? I can't remember the name of it, but maybe that was going to be more effective. But he used it and they watched him use it and it was like, yeah, effective, but I don't think it was like that. I don't know. And finally, and he's talking to Shara, and Shara, honestly, his trying to like converse with her about this topic is so much like me trying to talk to Owen sometimes. I ask questions because I want to like spin out all the possibilities. You guys have watched me do that often enough on the podcast where I'm like, what if this? And then I go down a complete rabbit hole, or what if this? And I find that to be really fun. And then there's people like Shara or Owen And he says, doesn't it bother you not knowing? Nope. I wish we knew, but we don't. And that's how it is. They had plenty of reasons. Look. That's exactly the way he is. He's just like, no, I don't know. How is it, what is it like to just not ask questions perpetually? I am always questioning everything forever. And like, there are certainly drawbacks to that. It turns you into a cheaty from the Good Place. But there are also, you know, the aspects of not just taking everything at face value, which I think is extremely valuable. But anyway, when he says, what if he had a contingency plan they didn't like? She says, if we knew, we'd take his plan and make it happen. And he's like, wait, what? And she says, why are you shocked? And he's like, wait, I don't get why you would carry out his wishes. And she's like, it's the Emperor. If he had a plan and the High Council knew and they did not approve, then all I have to do is decide which of their judgments I trust more, and there is no contest. It is going to be the Emperor every time. And Lucan is like, all right, that sounds simple. But here's the thing. We're assuming that the Emperor is altruistic, and maybe that isn't true. Maybe he was a lot more influenced by Nakothi than we were willing to admit to ourselves, or that we were shown. So this is when they visit Zen. And let's see. The Aptasia. Thank you, George. Asher says, I read that and knew you wouldn't understand her perspective. No. Like, in moments of emergency, where it's like, well, what if we did this? I am very good at just being like, here's what we have to work with, and here's what we can, and I can shove all those other things to the side. But that's in moments of like a time limit, a specific objective. I can be very practical. When we're talking about something like this, where it's all gray area, and there's a lot of conflicting information, or, you know, loose ends, I mean, are you kidding? Forget it. Sammy says, I always thought of it as the Emperor loses, then the elders have a way to rule unopposed. Yeah, and that's what I'm figuring. But if he loses then versus losing later, what difference does it make? Clearly he was about to do something that they wanted to stop him before he could get to it. It feels like. I mean, I don't know. So Lucan is talking to Zen, and Shara kind of just like goes off to do her own thing. But Lucan is like, hey man, I'm trying to find some stuff out. Do you think that you could like take me down on a bit of a tour? And when he brings Lucan down, there's a spot where he normally would open another trapdoor to go further down. And instead, he opens a door to the side, and Lucan is like, wait a second, but what about this door? You've taken me down before. Why aren't you bringing me over here? And why is it covered by a rug? And he kneels and reads it, and he gets this bit of Zen, who was assigned to cover the door, and he doesn't know what's under there. He doesn't really care about hiding it. He's just doing it because that's what he was told to do, and he doesn't want to get in trouble. And Lucan is like, I'm going down here. And at first, Zen is like, what the fuck? You can't just do this. And Lucan is like, look, do you know where we were? Do you know where we were assigned? And he acts, of course I don't. And Lucan's like, yeah, motherfucker, you do. Get out of here. I have one question remaining about the circumstances surrounding his death. I think this could help me unravel them. And I love this because I'm thinking, is he trying to appeal to this guy's sense of like justice? No. His love of theatricality and drama. A good production was his passion. This was a chance to take a peek behind the curtain at the most exciting tragedy ever since the Elder War, the death of the Emperor. I absolutely love this as a motivation. This bitch just likes the drama. He is here for the tea. That is what he, like, honestly, I can relate. There are times where I am like, this does not involve me, but I'm about to involve myself because I just want to know what the fuck. So I just found it really funny that I thought he was doing something here to try and be like, don't you care about... Nope. It's just about gossip. That's it. I love it. So he goes down there and he reads all of these coffins and realizes this is where the regents sleep. And he says to Zen, these are regents. And Zen is like, bullshit. These are regents. These are weapons. And they're being kept here because they're made from chimera and they're dangerous. And Lucan just looks at him. And then Zen is like, wait, are they not? And Lucan's like, they sure aren't. And he says, Ergnaut, swallow me and spit me out. Zen offered him a hand up, which Lucan took. Now, I know I don't need to tell this to a gardener, but I was never here, Lucan finished. He would keep his mouth shut, at least until he confronted Yala. Why are you going to do that, Lucan? Why are you going to do that? I just want you to not do that part. If it is all the same to you, it would be super cool if you just kept your mouth shut, really, for a while. Shara is going to be so mad. That is all I can think, is she's going to be really pissed. I don't know. Oh my God, you guys. I don't know. All right. Well, that is the end of the chapter, and I managed to keep my shit on time. That doesn't happen. I'm very proud of me. I am really enjoying this book. I can't... Every time I get to about this point in Shara's book, I start to be like, what's up with Calder? Because, you know, he just went through this massive battle and has his own whole thing going on. And I am deeply curious about his perspective throughout all of this. But I'm just going to have to wait and find out. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out with me. And thank you, Asher, for commissioning this episode. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.